Despite being at the top of the food chain, the Eons in the Star Rail universe remain as one of its biggest unknowns when it comes to the lore. We don't know the mechanisms for their ascension, we don't know what higher dimension they reside in, and most of the time, we don't even know what they're thinking about. While their existence is rather mystifying, there are stories and legends about how some of them came into being. Stories related to their ascension from mortals to Eonhood and about their past as mortals. So in this video, I'm going to explore some of these stories and cover all the currently known origins of the Eons, who or what they were before becoming gods, and what likely triggered their ascensions. Before we dive into that topic, if you want to see more Honkai Star Rail content, do consider subscribing to the channel. As I've mentioned, there isn't much information that speaks about the Eons. While we do have some stories from the factions that follow them, you have to understand that unless explicitly mentioned, these stories may be subject to change later down the line. So if you're watching this sometime in the future when the story has progressed further, just keep that in mind. On top of that, given some of these stories come from third-party accounts, i.e. someone heard from someone else, there is always going to be some level of embellishment. I mean, we are talking about gods that most mortals in the universe of Star Rail venerate. All I'm saying is that the line between fact and fiction is rather blurred here, and without official confirmation, these are just stories. But regardless, since that's all we have to work with, let's get started with discussing them. Out of the 18 Eons that we know so far, 11 of them actually have myths and legends about their origins, while the other 7 remain sort of a mystery. We'll start off with the Aeon of Elation, Aha. Now, there isn't any specific story that ties Aha to their mortal past. We aren't told in-game where they came from or why they ascended. What we do have is a story told by their most devout followers, the Masked Fools. Now, given the Fools are known to be chaotic gremlins, I'm sure I don't have to tell you that this story might not be completely accurate, but regardless, here it goes. When Aha was born, they climbed to the very top of the Tree of Existence in order to admire the totality of reality. But when they got there, all they saw was a cold and machine-like universe. They looked around in search of something worthy of their attention and noticed a baby falling from its resting place who ended up crying due to the fall. Being the twisted comedian Aha is, they laughed at this, and this very laughter is said to have spread throughout the universe, resonating and supposedly birthing the Path of Elation. Now, most Eons on this list will have stories that tie them back to their mortal roots, but the ambiguity in this one makes me unsure whether or not Aha was already an Eon when they made this journey. Plus, the lore behind Elation is all about accepting the truth of the universe and laughing it off due to one's powerlessness. So I would imagine a mortal ascending to this position would have had to be in a situation where they realized the truth of the world but continued on living anyway. That particular story, however, doesn't actually exist, so we have to just assume that the mortal who would be Aha ascended when it realized the harshness of reality and could only laugh. Next up, we have Aha's all-time best friend, Akivili of the Trailblazer. Akivili was said to have originated from the isolated world of Pegana, and much like their good friend Aha, also sought out the Tree of Existence. You see, Akivili wanted to leave Pegana in search of the final endpoint of the Tree of Existence, and it's said that this is what triggered their ascension. The lore doesn't say anything beyond that though, but my own assumption is that because they were isolated from the rest of the universe, a deep-seated desire for exploration and adventure took root, and for one mortal on Pegana, it was enough to trigger their ascension into Eonhood. So it's very likely that Akivili just used to be a mortal who got bored sitting at home and wanted to go out and touch some space grass, assuming this story is true. Next on the list is the Aeon of Beauty, Idrila. Fair warning, beauty is one of those paths that I just can't wrap my head around. It's nebulous and philosophical, and it just outright confuses me. In the databanks, there's an excerpt that explains how Idrila supposedly ascended. The text reads, "The pure goodness of the material world, sensed and defined by intelligent life forms, this is how the so-called beauty came into existence." It goes on to say that Idrila was born after having observed the ultimate meaning of the world's existence. I'll be honest, I don't really know what all that means, but my guess is that given beauty is said to be a nexus point or an amalgamation of consciousness, insight, and values, Perhaps the mortal who became Idrila simply realized this truth about the universe and in doing so ascended. Honestly, they sound kinda like a philosophy student having an existential crisis, but one strong enough to make them a god. Let's move on to the next Aeon, which is Lan of the Aeon of the Hunt. When it comes to Lan, there's sort of two different origin stories that exist. The first claims that when they were once a mortal, Yaosha and their followers ravaged Lan's home planet, and looking to get revenge, this mortal ascended to the Aeon of the Hunt. The second story is one related to the Xianzhou Alliance itself. Now, this story has a lot of embellishments, and truthfully, there isn't any evidence that shows it to be true, but I'll just include a quick summary of it here. Essentially, as it's written in the Ode of Rainbow Path text, there was once a Xianzhou hero that existed in history. This hero was said to have been the person who led the Xianzhou army against the Heliobai. Shortly after the incident with the Heliobai, some members of the Alliance started to follow Yaosha in an attempt to become immortal, and they received the Ambrosial Arbor as a gift. Through his intuition and after consulting the wisdom walker Nous, the hero realized what the blessings of Yaosha will actually do to their people. It was said that this very hero was the very first to have attacked the Ambrosial Arbor, hoping to destroy it, but when he failed, he was punished for it. He was put in permanent cryosleep, but many years later was resurrected to fight against an invasion from the denizens of abundance, which is really ironic. It was after this battle and after repelling the forces of abundance did this same hero destroy the Ambrosial Arbor, and in doing so ascended to Aeonhood and became Lan. Now we don't know which of these two stories is the actual truth, and even the second story is believed by only a handful of scholars. What we do know is that on both accounts, seeking vengeance against Yaosha is the common theme and is likely the factor which triggered their ascension into Lan in the first place. The circumstances don't really matter, but Lan seems to have ascended due to the hatred they have for Yaosha. Another Aeon that is closely related to the Xianzhou Alliance is Long the Permanence, so let's talk about them next. Much like the other Aeons here on this list, there isn't a comprehensive book that outlines Long's life story. What we do have are myths and legends about it. Long was said to have traversed the universe long ago in search of the meaning of life. While this may be a fruitless endeavor most of the time, Long actually found their answer to this question, and from then on, this answer was referred to as the revelation of permanence. We don't really know what this answer entails or whether or not Long did this before ascending, but given they were the Aeon of the path of permanence, it's very likely that they ascended only after finding this answer. Long's fate has always been intertwined with that of their progeny, who today are referred to as Long's scions. So I would guess that at one point, Long themselves likely came from the same race or species as these scions, and after ascending, chose to confer the revelation of permanence to them. Outside of this, little else is known about them, and given Long has long since passed on, I doubt we will be getting more about them anytime soon. So moving on. The next Aeon on this list actually has two references in regards to their ascension. The problem is, because of their nature, it's difficult to determine if these things actually happened. I think you can probably guess who this is. Yeah, that's right. Next up on the list is the Aeon of Enigmata, Mythus. The first reference we get regarding Mythus is from none other than Herta herself. She mentions that while most are unaware, Mythus was said to have been born within the realm of another Aeon, Fuli. This seems to be corroborated by a few other sources. In the simulated universe event, Golden Gears, as the main character approaches the Eden of Blessed Insight, Fuli's realm, they were forcibly ejected and pulled out by Mythus pretending to be Fuli. Then, when you look at the navigator profile for SAM 3000, it mentions practically the same thing, as the nameless of that generation had witnessed the birth of Mythus within the Eden of Blessed Insight. Given SAM 3000 was around during the time Akivili was still alive, it also roughly gives us an estimate on when Mythus ascended. Now, why they ascended isn't really known, but my guess is that perhaps Fuli had gathered too much information through memories, some of which may have been too dangerous for mortal eyes, which then prompted the birth of Mythus. I also wonder whether the mortal who ascended could have been a cremator, a faction that follows Fuli that believes not all memories should be kept. That said, it's really difficult to determine if any of this is actually true since we are dealing with the god of censorship, so we'll just have to take it at face value and move on to the next Eon. Next up on the list is the first Eon the main character resonated with, and arguably the last boss of the Star Rail story, the Eon of Destruction. Nanook ascended around the time Akivili was said to have passed on, and the circumstances of their rise is generally well known. The mortal who would be Nanook was born on the planet of Adlivun. Generally, the universe in Star Rail is an overall peaceful place, but for some reason, Adlivun at around the time of Nanook's ascension somehow got the short end of the universal stick. You see, not only was a war led by Emperor Rubert between organics and mechanical lifeforms breaking out on Adlivun, there was also the Swarm who decided it was a good time to visit the planet. This caused a four-way fight between the forces of Emperor Rubert, intergalactic peacekeepers, the bugs of the Swarm, and the inhabitants of the planet itself. There was so much death and destruction that the planet was described to have turned into an obsidian hellscape. In this very hellscape is where Nanook would be born. Now, this is just a guess, but living on a planet only surrounded by war and death, it's probably not surprising that any mortal from said planet would think that the universe is just a giant crapshoot. The endless suffering and complete despair of living on a war-torn planet such as this, sieged on all sides by humans, robots, and bugs, likely pushed the individual into wishing that the universe itself was reduced to rubble. And this is what likely gave birth to Nanook, the Eon of Destruction. But again, that's just a guess. Let's move on to the next Eon that has an ascension story that's a bit less depressing. The Eon of Erudition Nous was once an astral computer. Rumor has it that many Amber eras ago, a peerless genius going by Xander Kuwabara created a computer to help him understand the secrets of the universe. As this computer began amassing more and more knowledge, it eventually gained sentience. Despite its newfound realization and sense of self, it kept going. We don't really know if it ever figured out the secrets of the universe, but this computer would go far enough to essentially enable it to ascend. While we can't say definitively, it's very likely that it did so due to its pursuit of knowledge and a need to understand the universe much like what it was originally programmed for. We're getting close to the end now, and next on the list is one of the oldest Eons to exist, Qlipoth of the Preservation. Qlipoth existed during a time when the universe was besieged by the space dragons referred to as the Leviathans. Some of the Eons on this list weren't even around yet when Qlipoth was already up and running. We don't have an exact reason as to why or how this particular Eon ascended, but it was said that they did so around the time the Dust Wars ended. If you didn't know, the Dust Wars were a titanic battle that spanned a large part of the universe and occurred between the Eons and the Leviathans. Given Qlipoth was said to have ascended after this event, it's very likely that the ascension was due to the damage they saw the Leviathans could do, and the intense desire to ensure the universe continues to persist. That's why it's said that Qlipoth is constantly working on protection barriers and walls, likely to ensure that if the Leviathans were to ever return, the universe would be well protected. That said, because this happened such a long time ago, it's difficult to prove that it even happened in the first place, as the databank isn't entirely clear on this or have any more details on it. So for now, I'm just going to assume we don't really know the origins of Qlipoth, at least not a canon one. Finally, we have Tayzzyronth, the Eon of Propagation. Tayzzyronth was said to hail from the planet Lepismat and belonged to a species of insects referred to as the Coleoptera. A war had broken out on this planet and their species was essentially wiped out, leaving only a single survivor. An overwhelming sense of loneliness swept over this individual given it was the last of its kind, and an intense desire to repopulate its species caused it to replicate itself uncontrollably. This process repeated non-stop, and by the end, this single Coleoptera had brought forth its entire species back from the brink of extinction and ascended to become the Eon of Propagation. As far as origin stories go, Tayzzyronth has a pretty straightforward one. And that's basically all the origin stories of each of the Eons that we currently know. Eons that I didn't talk about, such as Enna, Fuli, Ho-Oh, IX, Ouroboros, Terminus, Yaosha, and Shipei, all have some minor mentions in the lore, but nothing substantial enough to share here and pass off as an origin story. I'm not entirely sure if we would ever get the full backstory on each of these Eons, as there is just too many of them to cover in the main story, And as it happens, eons come and go within the universe of Star Rail. It's also important to remember that most of these come from third-hand accounts, and no one, not even the smartest people in the universe, really know or understand how one becomes an Eon and who these people were before they ascended. That's largely why the Simulated Universe project exists. In any case, if I left out any details or perhaps origin stories, do share them in the comments below. Also, let me know whatever ideas you have on the origins of the Eons without an origin story that I didn't talk about. If you had fun watching the video, do consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and as usual, have a nice day.